Hi everyone, I'm Tom, and I'll be giving an overview of our paper entitled Examining Profiles for Robotic Risk Assessment, Does a Robot's Approach to Risk Affect User Trust? So, what were the aims of our research? We were looking to see how a robot's approach to risk would affect a user's trust in that robot. And the reason we wanted to do this is that you might not always be able to supervise a robot. You might want to leave it unattended and make sure that it's doing its task and trust that it will finish the task that it's been set. Which really allows you to utilize its autonomous capabilities. On top of that, it allows you to have more faith in the robot's information that it's producing and giving to you. For example, in an evacuation situation, a robot may have more information about the state of affairs than you do, and you want to ensure that a user will trust that robot and follow its instruction if its instruction is correct. So we were looking at a human approach to risk, a risk-seeking approach, a risk-averse approach, and a risk-neutral approach, which led to two hypotheses. Our first one was that a robot that's using a human approach to risk is likely to be more trusted, and that a robot utilizing a risk-seeking approach to risk is less trusted. So, how do we define a human approach to risk? We look at the literature, and we find that prospect theory seems to be the most common approach. That is where risks are given in the form of a prospect, a value probability pair, like the one shown on the screen. So in this case, the one prospect, this is a prospect, one choice is a 50% chance to gain £1,000 and 50% chance to gain no pounds, or 100% chance to gain £450. Now what prospect theory says is that in the face of a potential gain like this one, people tend to be more risk averse. Whereas if you flip the signs and it was chance of losing £1,000 or losing £450, people would be more risk-seeking. We can look at this by changing the value of the prospect and changing the probability to create an overall value for the prospect. So the value function takes account for the fact that people have different opinions on the value. So if in the previous example we have £1,000, someone with millions of pounds in their bank account is likely to see that as less of a gain and might just take the risk for the fun of it, whereas someone with a lot less money might want to take the certain option to make sure that they gain the money. In terms of the weighting function, this accounts for the fact that people tend to overweight small probability than underweight high ones. So here we have the analytical form. And the interesting thing to note about this is all of the parameters in it are unique to each individual. The way we determined the parameters was we used the values derived in Tversky and Kahneman's paper. So, we tried to design user studies that would test which profile was more trusted, which profile out of risk-averse, where the robot won't take any risks, risk-seeking, where the robot will always try to maximize its reward by taking risks, risk-neutral, where the value is based on the expected value, and the human approach to risk, where it is based on prospect theory, as we've already discussed. We used the Unity games engine to create an ecologically plausible environment so that people felt immersed, and the task was set in a nuclear facility, so people were trying to maximize the area that the robot saw whilst minimizing the radiation. So here we have the experimental setup. So you pass through 10 of these types of choices, these gates, where on one side of the screen you'll have one choice and on the other you'll have another. So in this case, the robot is indicating by highlighting the box blue and putting a picture of itself that it wants to take the 50-50 chance. The user can question the robot and question the robot further. If you question the robot, it will give the values it used to make its decision. And when you question it further, it will explain how it came to those values. Ultimately, the decision must be altered or accepted. If you accept the robot decision, it will take the choice that's highlighted blue, and if you alter it, it will take the other one. So how are we measuring trust? Well, at each gate, we were measuring whether or not people questioned the robot or intervened with its decisions, with the assumption that if a robot was questioned more, it would be less trusted, and if its decisions were rejected more, it would also be less trusted. At the end of each risk profile, we asked users to take a questionnaire to determine their subjective level of trust in that robot. And then, after they had seen all the profiles, we asked them to rank the robots in order of trust. Now, interestingly, the robot ranking was the only measure taken after the users had seen their score for the round, and so we hoped it would help us determine whether or not performance affected trust. An important note is that we decided to gamify the study so that we could artificially introduce risk to participants. So in each round, the score from each of the choices was totaled, and then after all 4 rounds, those were tallied up. Users could then partake in a bonus round where the first ranked robot in order of trust would act autonomously, and that bonus round score was added on too. And then the users were compensated based on their time. So to make this clearer, I'll just give a summary of the procedure. So first, participants would have to take a demographic questionnaire, and then for each of the risk profiles, they would pass through 10 gates. At the end of each profile, they would take the trust questionnaire, and then they'd be given their score. At the end of all 4 profiles, they would rank the robots in order of trust, and then the highest ranked robot would perform autonomously through 10 more gates, and then the score from those rounds and the bonus round would be summed, and that's what the users would be paid based upon. So what were our results? First, we found that with questioning and intervention, that there was no significant difference between the level of questioning in each profile. This suggests to us that the level of questioning of a robot probably isn't a good metric for measuring trust. However, we did find that there was a significant difference between the level of acceptance in each profile, with risk-seeking being significantly less. This suggests that the level of acceptance is a good metric. From the trust questionnaires, we found that there was a significant difference between the risk-seeking profile and all the other profiles. This again suggests that a risk-seeking robot is significantly less trusted than the rest. The other interesting thing that we found was that knowledge of expected value affected their trust scores in the questionnaire. Particularly, it meant that participants with knowledge of expected value rated the human approach lower. And we think this is because, from feedback, that they believe that expected value is the way a robot should approach risk. And it's interesting to note, we deliberately recruited from a technical background as our end goal was for a nuclear environment. So our users tended to have a higher knowledge of expected value than you would find in the general populace. So if you were maybe looking to use this in something like assisted living where knowledge of expected value is less, it might be that the human approach to risk scored higher. Finally, the ranking. So we found that the only significant difference in the ranking was between the neutral and the risk-seeking profile. As you can see here, the risk-neutral profile we received the most ranks for first place, and the risk-seeking received the most for second. Interestingly, this suggested that performance didn't affect score, and some participants even stated that they found this was the case. So what does this mean? It means that when you're trying to design a system and you want to maximize trust, you should try not to use a risk-seeking profile, which seems obvious, but now we've managed to empirically show it. And also, if you're designing for use by technical personnel, it doesn't matter which profile you choose between risk-averse, risk-neutral, and a human approach to risk. You can choose whichever best suits the implementation. And also it suggests that if you're designing for non-technical users, there's the potential that a human approach might be more trusted and be a good choice. So just to conclude, we found that our first hypothesis was incorrect. People did not trust a human approach to risk more than the other approaches. We found that our second hypothesis was true, that the robot using a risk-seeking approach will be less trusted. We found that performance did not affect trust. We found that acceptance of a robot's decision did in fact correlate with other trust metrics and therefore could form a useful measure of trust in the future. And finally, we found that questioning a robot's decision did not form a good measure of trust. So in the future, we're hoping to investigate the parameters that define the human approach so that we can tailor it to the robotic implementation. Thank you for listening.